Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your favorite conservatarian, me, Jeff Charles, where we choose truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got a return guest today, and crime is an issue. It's rising all over the country. It has been for the past few years, so we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about the ongoing effort to trans our children. Now, y'all know I've been writing about this a lot. I've been shouting about it from the rooftops. We need as much exposure as possible when we're fighting these things. But it's also important to highlight other strategies to push back against these efforts. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest, advisor for Citizens for Sanity, Mr. Ian Pryor, also with America First Legal. So we're going to get into some of these things. Welcome to the program, brother.
Hey, Jeff, how's it going? So what is it? Can I just ask what conservatarianism is?
Conservatarian, okay. That's an easy shorthand way to say that I'm a conservative / libertarian. I've got a lot of libertarian tendencies and I've got a lot of conservative tendencies, but I don't fall neatly into either camp completely. Although I will say, for me personally, it seems like as the days go by, I get a little bit more libertarian every day.
It's an interesting mix, and it's a good term. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as popular yet, but there are a lot of people who are starting to identify that way just because it's easier. But in one way, it's not as easy because a lot of people don't know what that means.
Right.
But I'm hoping it catches on more so I don't have to keep saying, yeah, I'm a conservative / libertarian. I've got libertarian, give the whole explanation. Yeah, but I think actually a lot of people on the right are conservatarians nowadays, even though they don't identify that way. I think that libertarianism has been adopted more by a lot of Republicans in many different ways. So I think it's very interesting to see that shift.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think you're even starting to see it sort of on the left of center as well, where people are trending more libertarian, that, maybe they're sort of classical liberals, but they see a lot of what's going on today and, they become more liberty minded.
Yeah, I mean, as more people realize that it's just better if they're left alone, they're starting to adopt more of those principles. And I do see, I think it was Dave Smith who says he's a big libertarian type. And I think he said it very nicely, like libertarians are what the left and the right should be if they actually held to their values. Like libertarians are anti-war. Democrats pretend they're anti-war, but when it comes down to it, they're down with it. But even when it comes to the statism aspect, I'm on the right. You do have a statist streak when it concerns law enforcement. Whereas, if we're believing what we say we believe, we want limited government and we want all government to be held accountable when they do something wrong. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we get into everything else, why don't you tell us Citizens for Sanity? This sounds like a new organization.
Yeah, that's right. We've been around for a little bit, about a month, and we're an advocacy organization. And, look, the best way I can say it is that, so much of what we see in America has just, is the result of insanity, right? Whether we're talking about not prosecuting violent criminals, whether we're talking about open borders that are straining our social safety nets, our schools, our hospitals, and we're talking about things like, critical race theory and seeing, race in everything and just really critiquing things, but actually not coming up to any kind of solutions. And then finally, I think the piece of the transgender issue, which, particularly in the schools has just become so widespread. And parents are starting to realize over the past 2 years, this is crazy what we are doing in schools and how we're really trying to, indoctrinate our children in these concepts that, for a variety of reasons. I mean, you'll see parents that have objections on faith-based reasons, and you'll see parents that have objections based on, the scientific method, biology, and chromosomes. And they're looking at this, and it's insane. And so our mission is to really highlight what is going on, not with, traditional liberals, but really that far radical left that is kind of taken over these narratives. And, if you do not, adhere to their values, if you do not accept their values as absolute truth, then you are a bigot, you are a horrible person, and you are not entitled to any opinion that may be different from them. I actually saw something on Twitter yesterday. You may have seen it too. It was a 98% of men refuse to date transgender women. This is bigotry and has to change. Like, no, it's not bigotry, and also it's not going to change. So if that's where you're going next with this, good luck.
Yeah, I did see that. I to be fair, I'm having a lot of people say that it wasn't real.
Yeah,
but
I don't know.
but I responded to it on Twitter, and I'm leaving it up because that specific instance may not be real. But I've seen this said before. I could go to Google right now and find people saying that you're a bigot if you won't date a transgender individual. And this is regardless of sexuality, whether you're gay or straight. If you are not willing to date a transgender individual, you are a bigot. I've been seeing this over the past couple of years. So even if that specific instance, maybe it was satire, I don't know, but it is a reality. They are trying to push that.
Well, it's funny because a lot of what we're doing is that kind of satire, right? We have billboards up in major cities all over the country, protect pregnant men from climate discrimination, violent criminals deserve our compassion and respect, vote progressive, all kinds of billboards that are resulting in people on Twitter. Some people will say, oh, fantastic, you're using the far left's words and thoughts against them, and other people are like, these far left lunatics with these billboards. So it's kind of interesting. I saw a billboard on Twitter in Portland, and it said, "Portland, check your white privilege." And for a second I thought, did someone steal our idea, or is this an actual billboard? And it was an actual billboard. Somebody actually put that up. Some, equity organization put that billboard up, which I just thought was funny because here we are putting up billboards that say those kind of things, really to highlight just how ludicrous, the woke left has become and where they're going to be going with their messaging over the, next year, 2, 3 years.
Yeah, it is sad because if I see a billboard like that in Portland, it's hard to discern satire from reality nowadays. I do a lot of satirical tweets, and it is hard. It is so hard in 2022 to write a satire tweet and have most people know that it's satire. Yep. Because the very nature of satire is that it exaggerates to such a ridiculous degree that it's not true, but that person is making a point using humor. And it's been difficult. I've had some ones where I tweet them and then most people think it's actually real. I'm like, damn, this is horrible. And I'm getting better at it to where, because there's always going to be some people who think it's real. I mean, there are still some people who still think that articles written by The Onion or the Babylon Bee are real, but it just speaks to how insane our society has gotten.
Yeah, we're clearly through the looking glass where you post something that is so absurd, half the people are going to recognize that it's satire. Half the people are going to either be, oh, this is great, or this is insane, but you can't tell the difference. I mean, that's where we are as a culture right now. And, a lot of it's been perpetrated by social media and the ability of people to, communicate with everyone across the country and, no limits on what people can say for the most part. And it's really just, it's become quite ludicrous.
Yeah. And it's funny, speaking of Portland, it wasn't last month, but it was a month before. I posted a tweet saying breaking: some Portland restaurant is promoting equity by having separate sections for Black diners and white diners. And it was so crazy. Most people knew that wasn't really happening, but I had some people you could believe that somebody would actually try that, because there are other entities that are trying to do stuff like that.
Schools do that with affinity groups, right?
Exactly. I was just going to bring that up.
We see that all the time. If I saw that tweet, I would think it was a real thing, to be honest with you, because I've seen these kind of things happen, throughout different industries, whether it's the education organizations or whether it's, other organizations. I've seen that kind of thing happen. So I would not be, I would think that was legitimate. Yeah.
So I definitely want to get to that part, especially with the affinity groups, because I think that'll be a good conversation. I just had a conversation about this yesterday. But I want to talk about crime first. Citizens for Sanity put out an ad that's been, I think it's gone viral. I mean, I've seen it everywhere, just highlighting how crime has swept the nation and how it's been surging over the past few years. I know there's not just one thing that contributed to this, but what would you attribute this rise in crime to?
Yeah, I think that, over the past, I want to say half decade, you've really seen this pushback on the criminal justice system and the foundations of the criminal justice system, whether it was from former President Obama, leading obviously into the George Floyd riots, where they want to defund the police. The police are colonizers. Every time you have, an incident with a police officer that, obviously goes viral, they want to essentially stereotype every law enforcement officer as somehow these people are terrible, which we all know in every industry, no matter what it is. You hear about, well, teachers are heroes. Look, some teachers are really good. Some teachers aren't good. Some architects are really good. Some aren't great.
Right.
Same thing with the police, right? I mean, they go out there, they do their job. They put their lives on the line every day. Not every single police officer in the country is going to be the best of the best.
Sure.
But by and large, I think it's important to respect, obviously, the law. It's important to respect law enforcement. And we've seen a significant decrease in that respect, over the past several years. And as a result, I think, you combine that with the progressive prosecutor movement where, they're letting criminals out, awaiting trial, they're giving easy plea bargains, and ultimately we're putting people back in the streets. They should not be back on the streets, and then they reoffend. And all of that creates this decreased deterrence, right? So if you think about the criminal justice system and criminal law, I remember going back to, maybe my third or fourth day of criminal law in law school, where we talked about criminal justice system. You have obviously the retribution factor, the deterrence factor, and the rehabilitation factor. Well, these progressive prosecutors are essentially saying, well, we're just going to focus on the rehabilitation factor. We're not going to worry about these other two. And as a result, you lose the deterrence for people that would go commit crimes if they know, listen, worst case, I'm going to get a slap on the wrist. I'm not going to spend much time in jail, if at all, and I'll get set free. And so that creates this system where people now, where violent criminals and criminals, they basically have the run of show out there, and they don't fear being put behind bars for committing crimes against society.
Yeah, I mean, if there's not going to be any consequences and you're a criminal-minded type, why wouldn't you?
Right.
And this is all being done under this misguided version of bail reform that we're seeing in New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles. And to me, this is where I'm going to pick on Republicans a little bit, because the reason why they're able to push this stuff and win people over with it is because nobody's offering an alternative. I mean, when it comes to bail reform, I think there is room to reform that system. I think there are a lot of ways where it's not fair. There are conservatives here in Texas who have been passing measures to help make that a little bit more fair. But the thing is, if we're not offering a better alternative, then these woke, progressive, Soros, I'm going to say Soros funded. I'm not an anti-Semite. Right. Yes. Then these people are going to hold supreme. So we need to come with something better so that people can still be safe, but then we also have a fair system. But even so, you're already seeing pushback against this. I mean, Chesa Boudin in San Francisco got recalled. I believe George Gascon in Los Angeles would have gotten recalled if that movement hadn't botched that whole thing. You can read all about that on Red State. Jennifer Van Law wrote a very exposing articles on that. But nobody wants this, and yet they're doing it anyway. After seeing the impact, because it's one thing to come up with the idea, but I mean, I guess that's not really an excuse, because Stevie Wonder could have seen that this was going to go wrong in the first place. But even so, they did it. Now crime is up. You would think that they would back off on it because people are getting killed. Why do you think that they're still doubling down?
Well, like anything, I think that the far left has really, taken hold of the rest of the left, right? So that when people run for office, they need to cater to their base. But I do think that we are going to start to see, in localities where Democrats are going to start putting up prosecutors that, yes, they may be Democrat, but they still believe in law and order. Because quite frankly, these progressive policies, these progressive prosecutors, and the resulting crime ultimately is hurting them. It is hurting everybody on the left, because they're seeing this and they're saying, look, what is all this, restorative justice, these progressive prosecutors? You put them in and then look what happens. People are getting back out on the street. They're reoffending, sometimes in deadly ways. And then you see from the video, I mean, these things are happening all over the country. Whenever this airs, just last night, look what happened in Memphis, where you've got somebody going on a shooting spree and murdering somebody just days after somebody was kidnapped and murdered in Memphis. I mean, this is what is happening in our cities. People are leaving the cities because of this. So if they don't course correct and get actual prosecutors, whether it's Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter, whether they get prosecutors that actually follow the law and don't try and make policy by not enforcing the law on the books, because that's what this is all about. We can't get policy passed through the legislature because the people don't want these policies. So instead, we're going to essentially legislate through our lack of prosecution or our soft on crime efforts at prosecution.
So do you think that there will be enough of a backlash to where Democrats are forced to recalibrate? Because I would like to believe that. I hope that's the case, but I know that a lot of people aren't really involved in their local politics like that.
Well, I think there will be, and I think San Francisco is a good option. I mean, it's San Francisco.
And that is a good example.
Yeah. They recalled this prosecutor. There are progressive prosecutors here in Northern Virginia. It's going to be interesting with local elections next year to see if any of them get primaried, by Democrats. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're going to start to see over the next few years whether this movement starts to essentially wither on the vine, because the other individuals on the left that would want to run for prosecutor that actually believe in enforcing the law, I think they're going to start pushing back, and we'll see. I think we'll see over the next 2 years where this ends up.
And one thing that I thought was promising was Mayor Eric Adams winning the primary, and he ran on a law and order campaign. He's been a little bit of a disappointment since he got in office, but he's done some good. But at the same time, even if you were to lock up these criminals, Alvin Bragg is just going to let them go. So, I mean, it's just going to make his job harder. So it really is the job of the voters. But when it comes to issues in the justice system, I mean, we saw people talking a lot about that after George Floyd. And what I don't necessarily agree with their takes on it, but it's a government agency, so it's going to have some issues. Law enforcement is an apparatus of the government. And right now, it seems like the only people who are trying to reform that are the progressive types who basically want to do it in a way that's going to make us all less safe. What do you think people on the right, as conservatives, should be offering up as a competing ideal on how to reform issues in our justice system, whether it's at the local, state, and federal level?
Well, that's a good question. And, one of the things that I heard debated a lot during the George Floyd riots was, body cameras for police officers. Mm-hmm. I am fine with body cameras. I think it's actually very important because, having worked for the city of Boston, I was a lawyer for the city of Boston, represented police officers. And I can tell you, I mean, all the internal affairs complaints that would come in that may not be valid, taking it from the police officer's side, having that evidence so that you can see, all right, this actually went down properly, right? So you can see how things were done, and then the officer or the complainant will actually have evidence on what happened. So it creates obviously an incentive to make sure everything is done by the book, but it also is an assurance that if somebody does get hit with an internal affairs complaint and it's frivolous, that there's going to be proof to show, like, look, this was a valid arrest, this was conducted properly, and there's no there. And as far as kind of going back to that experience, one of the things I saw was that when police officers have to worry about getting sued for every stop that they make, for everything that they do, and then they start to fear that, Comey called it the Ferguson effect, but I certainly saw something very similar when I was working in Boston, where, police officers, not all of them, but some of them would just get so fed up, they'd just sit in their car and they wouldn't take calls because they're like, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to go there and get an IA complaint. And that does not make anybody safe. And that is only growing now because every time they go out, you're going to have people that are going to be disrespectful, people that are going to not follow orders, people that are going to fight back. potential lawsuits, potential violent activities, because there is, quite frankly, right now, as you're seeing it, no respect for the criminal justice system, no respect for the police. And unfortunately, the citizens in these cities are the ones paying the price.
Yes. Yeah. And it's always the citizens who are paying the price. And it's interesting because I do think that a lot of this is the Ferguson effect. I wrote about that earlier, too. I think first off, you had record numbers of police officers resigning. And then the ones who stayed on, yeah, they're going to be more afraid to do certain things. And the thing is, I would actually support measures that would limit interactions between police and civilians, but not like that. Not like that. I'm talking about like traffic stops. Like if somebody has expired tags, do you really need to pull them over? No, you can take a picture, document it, send them the citation in the mail, and they can deal with it in court. That would help to keep civilians safe and help to keep officers safe, because there are officers who get killed during traffic stops. So, but these are things that aren't really being discussed because progressives, in my opinion, the high profile progressives don't really want to solve the problem. So because they can continue to run on it. But hopefully I'm hoping that conservatives are able to come with some actual solutions, because that's really the only way this is going to get dealt with. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, as far as the registration stickers, I hope I get pulled over for expired registration stickers all the time.
Yeah.
It's I'm always forgetting to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are certainly some things where that's a good example, right? Where you get a speeding ticket and it's a pain, right? You get it in the mail and you're like, you were speeding, and you try and do the math and you're like, there's no way I was speeding. You appeal it. No, you got to pay it. But we do put a lot of strain on our men and women in law enforcement, and we do have to protect them. But I think that the culture really has to start changing as well, and that's kind of what we are really trying to push through Citizens for Sanity is this culture of disrespect, not just of law enforcement, certainly that, but of peace and safety in the communities. And until we start improving on that, it's going to be very difficult to make any kind of incremental changes as we move forward, because quite frankly, we have to fix the problems that we have now. I mean, we saw in the ad, it's 207% increase murder rate in Portland over the past 2 years. Murder rate is at its all-time, where it's high, 25-year high. I mean, we really got the crime problem under control. The 60s, 70s into the late 80s, crime was through the roof. And then in the 90s, it starts going down and progressively gets down to where it was right around 2014, 2015. And now we're seeing it go back up. So, it's really important that we, for everybody's sake, that we go back and look at where things have gone wrong to bring it back to this spike.
Yeah, I mean, I know here in Austin, last year, they had, I believe, we had 89 homicides. And that was a record. It hadn't been that high since like 87. And it's gotten pretty bad. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think there is a culture shift that needs to happen. And unfortunately, what happens is when you do have a bad police officer, you've got people who will use those people to make it sound like all police are bad. So, I mean, that there does need to be a culture shift there, too. But the thing is, how do you bring about that culture shift? I mean, I know that's what you guys are doing, but how do you think that we can change people's minds on that?
Well, I think it's important that people understand what is going on, right? What is going on in these cities, what the impact that it has on these communities, right? I mean, you have high crime, people's stores get shoplifted, it's not safe to open businesses, those kind of things depress areas and create impossibilities for people to go out and live the American dream if their streets aren't safe. I mean, in order to thrive as a country, in order for small businesses and communities to be able to thrive, you need to have safe streets. And so, there's lots of different projects that have been initiated over the years, from the Justice Department, giving local grants for certain programs, see something, say something, all those different kind of things where you're really kind of marketing towards people to help not just the police officers, but the community, to help keep the community safe as well, to get them to buy in that, hey, this is a team effort. We all need to make sure that this community is safe and really work within that community to make sure that, individuals aren't going out there and committing these violent crimes, which, obviously is devastating to everybody.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that the community does need to be more involved and even have a better relationship with their local police department as well, because I think that would cut down on a lot of the issues that we have. But I want to kind of pivot to the war on children. I mean, the issues that are coming up with these efforts to promote certain types of ideology in classrooms, and not even just in classrooms. I don't know if you saw this story, but in Wisconsin, they had a pride parade. I can't remember which city, and they had a booth there, and I mean, and kids were coming to this. They had a booth there where they were giving out letters of readiness for free to minors, so they could use that to get their insurance to cover, whatever type of medical or even surgical transition treatment that they wanted to get. So this is mainly, I think it's mainly happening in the schools when it concerns children, but it's even outside of that. So what are you seeing going on right now?
This is spreading like wildfire. I mean, quite frankly, it's a social contagion, and it is being pushed on the internet. Is being pushed, unfortunately, by some medical professionals. It is being pushed in the schools, and really the issue is that you need to, one, according to the far left, you need to accept this, right? So you need to deny whatever it is you believe, whether it's based on faith or, again, based on science. You need to deny the belief that a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl. That's number one. Number two, when somebody comes to you, whether it's your child or someone else, you need to immediately affirm their decision that they are now a different sex, right? And if you don't do that, then they will not. Oh, shit.
Uh-oh, do we have an issue?
Maybe. I don't know what happened. Hold on one second. I'm going to see what
Okay.
happened. I can hear you. I can't see you.
Oh, you still can't see me?
No.
Hmm. Oh, I lost him.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I think my computer was unplugged.
Ah.
All right, we want to start back up where somewhere?
Yeah. So let me just start the question over again. So basically, okay. Okay. So yeah, I'll go this way. So Ian, I want to pivot to the war on children. America First Legal, I believe, put out an ad about that as well. And we've been seeing these issues with the left trying to basically trans our kids. And this isn't just happening in schools, although that is mainly where it's happening. And I don't know if you saw this story, but in Wisconsin, can't remember the city, but in Wisconsin, they had a pride parade. And they had adults there, but they also had kids too. And they had a booth where they were giving out free letters of readiness for children who wanted to medically transition or surgically transition. And what these letters do, just for the audience, they make it easier to have insurance cover these types of treatments. And also you give them to doctors so that they believe that you've seen a therapist who has said, okay, you can go ahead and transition. It just helps to streamline the process. So, but it is happening in schools and everywhere else. So what is it that you're seeing with this whole thing? Because it's been blowing up over the past couple of years, but what are you seeing?
Yeah, and you brought up America First Legal, and actually what we did, we filed a lawsuit yesterday in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, because of the Eau Claire area school district, and what we're seeing really across the spectrum. Parents don't have a right to know if their child goes to school and says, I'm a boy, I want to be a girl now, I'm a girl, I want to be a boy now. So they do not include the parents unless the student gives their consent. So really what they're saying is, as a parent, you need to accept this, right? You need to deny your beliefs, whether they be based on faith or whether they be based on science. You need to deny those. Number two, if your child says that they're now a different sex, you need to affirm that. So you don't get to say, well, look, let me deal with this. Let us deal with this as a family. We're going to figure this out. We'll, whether it's, through different means, we can work our way through this. No. If you don't affirm it, then that's abuse. And so if you don't affirm it, we are not going to accommodate you by letting you be part of the process with your kid in our school that you pay for, right? That is what is happening. That's what is happening in Eau Claire. That's what's happening in Loudoun County, Virginia, Fairfax County, Virginia, at schools all over the country. And it is absolutely like, what dystopian world do we live in where that is acceptable? But this is happening everywhere, right? I mean, as you talked about with these pride parades or pride events, I mean, the fact that they are pushing this on kids, where kids are going to go into a process where they're taking drugs to stop puberty, to stop science, and then they're going to take cross-sex hormones, which are not approved for this, and then they're going to have surgery. I mean, there was a post on online last week on social media of a mother, her daughter, and her son. And the daughter had her shirt open and had just had her breasts taken off. And the son's just there like, why am I here? You're putting that out. I mean, if somebody came in and had to have their arm amputated, would they come out and say, oh, look at this great surgery I just had? Like, you're mutilating your bodies. And these children, oftentimes, and again, this is something we're seeing more and more on in social media, they're coming out and saying, there's no going back. I regret this decision. Yeah. It's irreversible. You are messing with science. And when you do that, science is going to hit back as you get older. And what these school systems and the people that are pushing this are doing to children is reprehensible.
It's evil. I mean, if you're a 10-year-old child or 15 years old, you are not able to make those decisions. And and it's funny because you were bringing up how they're saying, oh, parents, if you don't affirm this, then you're bigots. But that's assuming that they even let the parents know. Because with your lawsuit,
they're making the assumption now they're just going to toss the kid. And we had a state senator here we need to trust the child's instincts. Trust the child's instincts. Child's instincts are developed through teaching, right? If you have a 4-year-old and you don't teach that kid over and over and over again not to look both ways when they cross the street, their instinct is going to be not to look both ways. Are you going to affirm that, or are you going to shape them and say, here's why you need to look both ways? Right? The idea that a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old has instincts about something that could impact them for the rest of their lives is insane. It's crazy.
It's like you're not even allowed to get a tattoo if you're under 18 in most places, unless your parents approve of it. And I think in some cases, not even then, but you're going to let them go through mutilation. Or even if you don't go that far, you're going to let them take these puberty blockers that do have permanent impacts just because they say that this is what they want. And I think in a lot of cases, they are being influenced. I mean, in Abigail Schreier's book, she talks about a study in the UK in 2018 showing that there was a over 4,000% increase in girls wanting to be boys. That is not organic. I'm sorry. That is not organic. And actually, I'm going to read another statistic to you, Ian, and I want to get your reaction to this because I've talked to some other guests about this. So I'm just going to, this is from the Florida Standard. Came out like a couple weeks ago. It says, quote, from 2017 to 2021, Florida Medicaid saw only a 63% increase in children receiving therapy for the treatment of gender dysphoria. At the same time, there was an alarming increase in pharmaceutical and surgical treatments for gender dysphoria, including a 270% increase in children receiving puberty blockers, a 166% increase in children receiving testosterone, and a 110% increase in children receiving estrogen. Now, mind you, these numbers are only from Florida Medicaid. It doesn't account for children who are getting treatment outside of that. But just that alone, what's going on here?
What it tells me is that people they're self-diagnosing, and they're going in, and doctors and medical professionals aren't saying, well, look, do you have gender dysphoria, which is actually a thing, and usually right. 70 to 80% of cases phase out with time. And they skip that step and they say, well, we need to affirm right away. So you come in and you say, well, I'm a boy, but I feel like a girl, or vice versa. Okay, let's get you puberty blockers. Let's get you set up, and we're off to the races. That's like if I go into, an orthopedic surgeon and say, hey, I need a knee replacement. And they're like, okay, yeah, sure, you can have a knee replacement. Like no physical therapy, nothing to that extent. Don't even do an MRI.
Don't do an X-ray.
So now, the percentages of MRIs and physical therapy have remain largely the same, but knee replacements are through the roof. Well, that tells you something, that people are going in and saying, this is what I want. And medical professionals are saying, okay, we're going to affirm that. That is so incredibly dangerous. And, people need to wake up and see what's going on. And now when you put that in schools, it adds an even different layer, because this is the government. This is your local government. This is the federal government now with Title IX manipulation, trying to interpret Title IX in a way that was never meant to be interpreted. Now pushing this stuff down to schools so they can say, well, if you don't do this, you're not going to get that federal money. And it's cutting the parents out. And as we talked about earlier, sometimes the parents don't even know. They're operating under the assumption that their default position is, well, some parents might not affirm this. In fact, probably most parents won't affirm it. And therefore, we need to make this blanket policy that says only the child has the right to authorize the school to contact the parents about this. Otherwise, you're outing the child. I mean, you need to have a permission slip to give a kid Tylenol in school, but you can allow the kid to go in there and say, I want to be referred to as a different sex? I mean, come on.
So, and I want to get a little bit more into your lawsuit, but I always ask this question when I'm talking to somebody about this stuff. Why do you think they're pushing this stuff so hard? Like, what is motivating this?
I wish I knew. And I think I wish a lot of people knew, because it is so far out there that it's tough to understand what the rationale is. I mean, it is so anti-science. It is so anti-common sense. What is the possible plan here? What is the end game here, other than this is a social contagion that quite frankly, was something that was considered a condition before, gender dysphoria, and now is being considered a civil right. And the ball is just rolling down the hill, and somebody needs to stop it, because if it doesn't, I fear for what's going to happen for this generation of children, especially the ones that are dealing with this. I mean, you now have in schools under the Q of the LGBTQ, which means queer. So effectively, a kid can say, I identify as a cat or a wolf or a dog. And they have to respect that. And it's the furries, right? They have furries in schools. I mean, I've heard from dozens of parents that this is an issue that exists in schools. At what point do we draw the line? How have we not drawn the line already? And so, that's one of the reasons why it's important for parents to exercise, their rights in court and exercise their children's rights, on their behalf in court, because if we don't stop it this way, then, I don't know what the next 10, 20 years is going to look like.
Yeah, it ain't going to be pretty. I mean, and speaking of satire, I mean, I once did want to tweet about a kid who identified as Superman and jumped out of a tree and broke his arm, and the teacher let him do it. Now, obviously that wasn't real, but again, some people believe it.
So when I was 5 years old, it was like right around when Superman 2 came out. And I was like, oh, maybe, and I had this superhero dictionary, and there was like Superboy. I'm like, oh, maybe I could be Superboy. I tried to lift my parents' car, and I got a hernia, and I had to go and get operated on. And it's not like my parents then were like, okay, well, you can keep doing that. They're like, what are you thinking? What were you trying to do? Right? It's crazy. But where do you draw the line on what children and their imaginations become reality? Mm-hmm. And we're not putting any sort of guardrails on that imagination. And it's harming children.
Yeah. If you still believe in Santa Claus, you can't make decisions about your gender. Or if it's been a few years ago that you believed in Santa Claus, you still shouldn't be able to make decisions about this stuff. But I want to talk about your lawsuit. So how did this come about?
Well, really about, I think in March or April, some things started to come out from the Eau Claire area school district about teacher trainings that talked about, parents not having a right to know about their child's gender identity at school. There were plans that the school would develop that would not include the parent if a child chose to identify as a different sex. There was a teacher in the Eau Claire area school district that had a poster up that went viral. It said, if your parents don't accept you or affirm you, I'm your mom now. And so you had all of this swirling, and I wrote an op-ed on Fox.com, I think in April, and we talked to the parents out there, the parents group that's the plaintiff, and we met with them, and it's widespread, and certainly not just Eau Claire, but these brave parents were willing to take on their school system, and so America First Legal, with the assistance of Wisconsin Institute on Law and Liberty, brought this lawsuit yesterday in federal court under the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, one of the oldest liberty rights recognized by the Supreme Court of the United States, is the parent's right to raise their child as they see fit. And quite frankly, when you have a school system stepping in between the parent and the child on these kind of issues, that is a violation of the parent's constitutional rights.
So is this the first lawsuit that's been filed specifically against school districts for trying to conceal gender identity from parents, or are there more?
I think there's a couple of others. I know there was one in Iowa filed a few months ago. There might be two in Florida. I believe there's one in California. But I really think you're going to start seeing these pop up all over the place. I mean, when you talk about the issues that relate to the school policies with transgender students, you're talking about pronouns, right? And that ultimately becomes a First Amendment issue. It also could be, a free speech and religious conscience issue. And you see some lawsuits out there on that. Then you have the bathroom, locker room issue. There's been a bunch of litigation there. There's a case currently pending in the 11th Circuit en banc. And if that goes a certain way, it could end up at the Supreme Court. You have the sports cases as well. And then this is that fourth iteration, which I think we're starting to see now pop up more frequently, because ultimately what has happened is, prior to the past couple of years, the left would bring these lawsuits against school systems and say, Johnny wants to use the girls' room now. You're not allowing him to do it. You're denying his rights. But you didn't have the other side of that, where you had a student saying, well, look, I need to now either share a bathroom biological male, or I have to be the one that goes and uses the private bathroom. I'm the one with the scarlet letter on me. I'm the one that's viewed as being the problem. And so now you're starting to see people bring those suits. And then the parental piece, I think that's somewhat of a new evolution. That, it doesn't really get debated in school board meetings, because nobody's crazy enough to actually put this up for a debate in the community, because they know that it would be rejected. I mean, in Loudoun County Public Schools, they passed a policy where, it was the bathroom policy, locker room policy, sports policy, and pronoun policy. Okay. And then 2 months later, they slipped a regulation in there without public debate about parents not needing to know. Right? That's how they do it. And so now parents are catching on, and they're starting to bring these suits.
Yeah. Something similar is happening in Round Rock, which is a suburb of Austin. I mean, it's happening. And the reason I asked that question, because there was a case in Kansas. They just got settled. A teacher who was disciplined for refusing to use the pronouns, but she sued and she won. There was a case up in Illinois where Parents Defending Education sued because they were using those racial affinity groups, and they won that case. So I am increasingly believing that lawfare is not the only way, but a very powerful way to push back against this stuff. Because the question has always been, when this whole thing first started, it's like, yeah, we can complain about this and we should expose it, but what the hell are we going to do about it?
Right.
I see what you're doing and what others are doing as a huge part of the solution. Do you think, and you mentioned that there would probably be more lawsuits, and I agree with you. Do you think that this is what's going to turn the, what's the word I want to use? Is this going to be the tipping point, or turn the needle when it comes to getting rid of this stuff in private schools? Yeah,
I certainly think it has to be part of the solution. And I want to just back up for a second, and then I'll get to that. But the Kansas case I thought was interesting, because in the decision, and I know it's settled, but in one of the motion decisions, it talked about how not telling the parents, or not giving access to the parents of records relating to your kid's identity is a FERPA violation. That violates federal law. We're also seeing across schools now, and over the past 2 weeks, I can't tell you how many phone calls I've gotten where teachers are handing out written surveys, pamphlets to students asking them for their pronouns. That's a violation of the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. You're not allowed to do analysis, evaluation, surveys that relate to things of sexual opinions or behaviors or family life. That they're blatantly violating the PPRA, in my opinion. As far as litigation overall, I think it is definitely part of the process, and it is an important part of the process. One of the things I learned out here in Loudoun County was, I always used to say, activate, investigate, communicate, right? And so you activate when you kind of wake up and see what's going on. We've got to do something about this. Then you start investigating, right? You're sending FOIAs, you're talking to people, you're figuring out exactly what is going on. And then you have to start communicating it to the rest of the community, to the media, to make sure that people understand what's going on. And what happened in Virginia was, all throughout that process, it just kept repeating and repeating and repeating, and it ended up in a political victory at the statewide level for Youngkin, Sears, and Miares. But ultimately, there's a fourth prong to that, which is litigate. Because the government and the bureaucracy is going to move slowly. That's just the nature of things. Now, courts don't move exactly quickly either, but you can't just rely on the political process at your state capitol or the federal government. The Constitution exists for a reason, and it needs to be enforced. And especially when we're talking about children and parents' rights vis-a-vis their children, I cannot think of a more important right in the United States than that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And it's funny that you laid it out that way, because that's the way I've been thinking about it when it comes to these prongs to attack this stuff. And we all play our different part. Like I'm more on the exposing and investigating role, but then there's also the political side of it. And when they passed those, I think Texas and Florida passed laws against teaching a lot of this stuff, and I think they'll be effective to a certain extent. But my concern was that when those laws were passed, that the base would say, okay, it's taken care of. No, it's not. They can get it. They can get around that stuff. But then you also have litigation. And if these entities are afraid of being sued and losing a lot of money and getting even more exposure, I think that will help to move the needle. So I'm definitely on board with you on that. So last question. I mean, you've got this lawsuit going. I mean, what else do you have coming down the pike as far as fighting this battle?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, America First Legal Center for Legal Equality. We've got a few cases out there. The city of Philadelphia, we're suing for their, essentially destroying merit-based admissions and really the war on merit. We've got a case in Loudoun County, similar type case to what's going on in Eau Claire. We've got the case in Eau Claire. I mean, we have other cases as well against corporations, but there are going to be more suits down the road against these rogue school systems that feel that the child belongs to the school system, the child belongs to the government, and not to the parents. And this is a righteous cause that needs to be fought. And, for far too long, the left has been the ones that have been on offense by litigating these things. And I think now, especially after the past 2 years, starting with COVID, you're starting to see, common sense individuals, not necessarily right or left, but people that are committed to the rule of law, committed to the parent-child bond and relationship. And, this is going to be fought out in the courts for years to come.
Yeah, you're speaking my language now, especially when you talk about not being on the defense. I've been saying conservatives, we need to go on the offense, make them defend what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So before we sign up, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Absolutely. So on Twitter, I'm at Ian D. Pryor. But also if the things you've heard here are happening in your schools, go to America First Legal. It's aflegal.org. And you can actually submit something at aflegal.org/hotline. So I would encourage you to do that if you're seeing similar type things in your schools. And then, of course, on the other hat here, on the Citizens for Sanity, go follow us at @citizens_sanity. You'll see some interesting billboards, I think that'll make you think, but also some ads that don't pull any punches, because that's how we're gonna win, is by showing everybody exactly what's going on, why it's happening, and why it needs to change.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining the program, and I look forward to hearing more from you on this stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.